Hi guys, welcome back to this week's video. So this week I'm going to be putting up this little one in my shop. Her name is Hana the Pink Bunny, and my patrons have early access to her, so if she hasn't been adopted through them, then you can find her in my store at creaturesofnat.com. So in this video I'll show you how I made her, and if you want to know, then just keep watching. Alright, so I'm starting off with a resin cast of the bunny sculpt that I have sculpted, molded and casted in resin. So this particular one will have painted eyes. It is molded to support glass eyes, but for this one I just decided to use some painted eyes really. And I'm using this teal colour from the brand Derivian Matisse. I actually really like this colour. It's kind of a nice colour. I know I kind of want to use it on some more things, maybe paintings or something. So once that's dry, I was just painting in the irises there, so once that's dry I can go ahead and paint all of the pupils and around the eye. So I'm using some paint from Chromacryl, the brand that I normally use for black paint. It's got a nice consistency and it's pretty cheap in price. And it's just a water-based acrylic paint, and I'm just being a little bit more careful going around the iris area, but for the top I can be a bit more carefree because most of it's going to be painted for the iris anyway. So I wanted like big cute eyes for this one. So for the eyes, the way I paint them is sort of have a relatively dry brush effect and sort of just dabbing in some of the paint and sort of fading it out towards the iris area. Same deal for the other side, just fading it out with dabbing the paint on around the edge of the iris. You know, there's heaps of other ways to do eyes. This is just something that I like to do. And then once this is dry, I can then apply a varnish, which I've found one of the best ones is nail polish. So but I'd always just experiment with your resin, because things that are solvent based and resin sometimes don't mix very well. So always do a little test before you're applying any chemical-y stuff onto resin. And then I also paint in the nose and eye, mouth area where I want. I'm just going to do it a black colour this time. Because I just wanted it to stand out a little bit more rather than painting it pink. I thought of painting it pink, but as the bunny's going to be pink, I thought that might look a bit weird. For the faux fur, I'm using that notorious faux fur that doesn't trim or cut properly, but it is really, really soft. It's one of the softest faux furs that I've come across. And I have a little bit of this faux fur in stock, so I decided to try it out. I had a vision of doing a pink bunny with a longer white sort of mane around the neck. So I'm marking out the patterns on my faux fur. These patterns I've made myself. I have a body tip tutorial in my shop if you're interested in how I make my bodies. And then I go around and cut out all of the patterns using a small pair of sharp scissors, just so I can insert the blades in between the pile and only cut the backing of the fabric. And always when you're doing patterns on faux fur, just remember to take note of which way the pile is going. Otherwise, when you put your doll together, you might sew it with the pile going in the wrong direction and it might look a bit weird. So something to keep in mind when you're working with faux fur. Right, so a little look at what the actual faux fur looks like. You can see just how thick and plush it is. So it is quite a soft faux fur, but the pile isn't all that long, so sometimes that makes furring a bit difficult. So I'm just going around and further cutting out all of those pieces. So I'm going to be doing a white mane, so I've left that part out of the pink fabric, and I'm going to be attaching it in a fluffy white fabric. So I like to cut out all my pieces and then I will be sewing it up on a sewing machine. I prefer to use a sewing machine because it's a lot quicker and a lot stronger, but I mean there's pros and cons with all different ways of making dolls, whether it's hand sewing or needle felting or anything like that. So once we've sewn it up, I'll have something that looks like this. You can see how I've attached the white on the neck area, and I've also left the back end open so I can flip it the right way around. I wasn't particularly happy with the way this body turned out, so I did a bit more hand sewing to it to get what I wanted. It just wasn't sitting right for me, so I did some more work. So a little look at flipping the fabric the other way around. You can see there's a seam with this particular faux fur. You can fix that a little bit more by just pulling out the faux fur from the actual the seam. And just be careful when you're doing that, just because you can pull out some of that thread and loosen your sewing. Moving on, I've made the armature out of wire this time. I have a wire tutorial in my shop if you're after a ball and socket tutorial. I have that on my YouTube for free, and I have one on my Patreon for further details for anyone that wants to a little bit more. I also have some of that ball and socket armature in my store at creaturesnat.com. And once that's all done and glued together, I can start attaching the fabric to the resin and sewing it all up. So I use a tacky fabric glue to attach my faux fur to my resin. I get that locally from a store here called Spotlight, but you can find it anywhere in your local craft stores, online. It's just a clear glue, it's nothing special, but I find it's really, really strong at keeping fabric attached to resin. Once that's dried, I can start sewing things up and adding some polyfill, which is the stuffing that I use for all of my dolls. And I use a ladder stitch to sew everything up. Just always get yourself a good quality thread, because it really, really makes a difference when it comes to sewing, hand sewing things really. On the machine, it's not that much of a difference, but when you're hand sewing, it provides that little bit extra strength when you're putting some tension on the yarn. And then once I've sewn this up, I use that same tacky fabric glue to glue that fabric to the paws. I didn't paint any of the paws this time because they're going to be covered with faux fur anyway, so there was no painting necessary. And I usually leave that to dry at least for a couple of hours, preferably overnight. For the ears, I've actually sewn these ears together, and I'm just now picking out all of the pile from the seam, just being very, very careful not to actually pick out the thread and open up a hole. And for this, I'll just be gluing this on. You can insert an armature if you want to, but for this one I kind of wanted it a bit more floppy. Maybe in the next bunny I might do a little wire armature in the middle of the ears just to move them around. You can do resin ears as well and attach a ball socket armature onto it, but for this one I just wanted to do little floppy ears. So I've essentially just sewn a tube with one closed round end, and I'm going to be gluing it up to the space that I've left when I initially sculpted this. I made a space for ears to go that can also be used in ball and socket armature as well. And again, using that same tacky fabric glue, and I'm just being very, very careful not to actually get the glue on the outside of the ear. Otherwise you'll end up sort of gluing the pile together and you'll see that there's glue. So I'm just being very, very careful not to get that glue anywhere else but in the middle of that ear. And I just hold it in place until the ear is secure and can support itself. It only takes a few minutes, so yeah, get a video or something ready so you can sit and hold it there just to adhere a little bit more. Once that's done, I can go ahead and finish everything off, which would be adding some faux fur to the face and any little details like whiskers and stuff like that. So this little one will be available in my shop if she's not already in there, and if a patron hasn't actually snapped her up in their early access. If you'd like early access, you can find it on my Patreon for the smallest tier. And anyway, thanks to my Patreon for supporting me. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Creatures of Nat, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!